Namaste. In this video, we shall look at the first of the Mukhya Upanishads, which is the Isha Upanishad. Now, a brief introduction to the Isha Upanishad. Firstly, it is also called the Isha Vasya Upanishad because it gets its name because it begins with the shloka Isha Vasyamidam Sarvam. It's a very popular shloka. Because it begins with the words Isha Vasya, it's called Isha Upanishad or the Isha Vasya Upanishad. It is the second shortest of the Mukhya Upanishad. The first one, as we all know, is the Mandukya Upanishad, which has only 12 verses. Now, the Isha Upanishad has only 18 verses, so it's the second shortest. It deals with concepts such as Vidya and Avidya, which is knowledge and ignorance, the paths of sannyasa and karma, renunciation and action, and the nature of the self. It also contains the famous shloka Hiranmayena Patrena, which yogic practitioners must be knowing, is usually chanted as the Surya Namaskara mantra before one commences the practice of Surya Namaskara. Now, we will be covering all the topics which have been mentioned in the syllabus under Isha Vasya Upanishad. The first topic is the concept of Karmanishtha. Now, the Upanishad begins by enjoining that one must realize that the Jagat is in reality the Lord and protect oneself through renunciation and detachment. It begins with the shloka as we had seen before. Isha Vasyam Idam Sarvam Yat Kincha Jagatyam Jagat. It means all that exists, everything that exists has to be literally covered by the Lord, or in another way, seen as the Lord. Everything must be realized to be the Lord, whatever is on the earth. Tena tyaktena bhunjitha ma grita kasyat svidhanam, which means through this knowledge, protect yourself through renunciation and detachment, and don't hanker after others' properties. Now, the import of this verse is that, firstly, it says that everything has to be seen as the Lord, everything has to be realized as Ishvara himself. And therefore, through this knowledge, one has to develop a sense of renunciation because as human beings, we have no right to stake a claim to any property because it belongs to the Lord or is the Lord itself. So the Upanishad says that through this knowledge, you give up your attachments because there is nothing yours to be attached to it. So that is the first Upanishad. The second first shloka. The second shloka says that those who wish to live for 100 years should perform actions in such a way that the actions do not cling on to them. Now, what does it mean? It could be seen as a continuation of the first verse, which says that protect yourself through renunciation. Renunciation meaning you do your actions, but don't do them out of any expectation of return. So the second shloka continues that point and says that this is the only way that one can live. One who wishes to live for 100 years, one who wishes to live in the earth, has to do actions in a way that they do not cling on to him. How does he do that? He does that through renunciation and detachment. So therefore, a karma nishtha, or a man who is established in action, nishtha means being established in something. A man who is of established action is one who engages in actions in a detached manner and is consequently not bound up by his actions. So that is the concept of karma nishtha. It is practically the concept of karma yoga, where we do actions without expectation of return, so that they do not. Expectation of return is perhaps not a great way of putting it, but I think it is more to do with intelligent action in the sense that we do actions knowing that everything in reality is the Lord himself. So we do not expect return. Why? Because we don't have any right to expect a return. So that is the concept of a karmanishtha. The second topic is the concept of vidya and avidya. Now, the Isha Upanishad prescribes combining vidya and avidya. Now, the terms vidya and avidya have been interpreted in a particular way by Adi Shankara in his commentary, but I'm not going to be referring to that here. I am going to be referring to vidya and avidya as what they seem to refer to. Vidya referring to knowledge, and avidya, which is usually translated as actions, because actions are considered to be the outcome of ignorance. But anyways, vidya refers to knowledge, which we may consider bookish knowledge, which knowledge without any application, and avidya refers to actions which are done blindly without any knowledge. So the Upanishad says one has to combine these two, because it says that a person who follows only vidya, which is one who develops only bookish knowledge, or a person who follows only actions without any knowledge of them, both of them enter into darkness, meaning that both of them are ignorant. It says that vidya and avidya both lead to different results, and therefore one who knows this and combines both crosses over death and attains immortality. So this is the concept of Vidya and Avidya. The key point to keep in mind is that the Isha Upanishad prescribes combining Vidya and Avidya, which is knowledge and actions in one sense. But again, this is not how Adi Shankara defines the terms Vidya and Avidya, and this is not how he interprets this verse also. I'm giving this interpretation because I have a feeling that this is how this verse is usually interpreted in this modern day and age. So that is the concept of Vidya and Avidya. The next concept is the knowledge of Brahman. Now, the Isha Upanishad provides a description of Brahman in contradictory terms. And this is specifically done, it is done on purpose to bring out the infinitude of Brahman, because from the point of view of infinity, all these contradictory attributes are reconciled. Now, these are the different ways in which Brahman is described. It is unmoving and yet faster than the mind. Now, Brahman is defined as unmoving because what does movement mean? To move means to go from a place where one exists to a place where one does not exist. So this box could move from here to here. It exists here, it does not exist here. So it can move from here to here. So movement is only possible when there is a space where one does not exist. Think of a jar and think of filling that jar with pebbles. Now, if you put only 2 or 3 pebbles, you can shake the jar and the pebbles would move inside. Because why? There is space inside the jar where the pebbles do not exist, right? So they can move within. There is space for them to move. But if you fill the jar fully so that there is no gap between any pebble at all, there is no gap at all, it is entirely filled with pebbles. Even if you shake the jar, you can fill it in such a way that the pebbles don't move. Why can't the pebbles move? Because there is no space within the jar where the pebbles do not exist. The entire space within the jar is fully populated by the pebbles, and therefore movement is not possible. So movement is only possible when there exists some space where one does not exist, right? So Brahman is described as unmoving. Why? Because there is no space where Brahman or God does not exist. There is no space we can say that God is moving from here to there. That would mean that God exists here and does not exist there. So Brahman or God, or however you call it, the reality, cannot logically have movement because it is all pervasive. It exists everywhere. And yet it is described as faster than the mind. Now, what does it mean? Mind is usually considered to be the fastest phenomenon that we know of. We could be sitting here, but our mind could be, somewhere else. It could be in the US or it could be in some other planet altogether. It is very fast. And yet, Brahman or the consciousness is faster than the mind, because wherever the mind goes, consciousness is there before it. How? Because consciousness is that which is aware of the movements of the mind, which means it has to exist wherever the mind goes. If it goes to a different loka or a different planet, wherever, it is consciousness which illumines it. It is consciousness which is present there before the mind, in order for the mind to go there. So in that sense, Brahman is described as faster than the mind. So this is the first description. The second description is that it is both near and far away. Now this could be interpreted in 2 ways. One is that think of if something is all pervasive, we could also think of it as being very close to us. Think of space, for example. I can think of space as something which exists very near to me. I can also think of space as something which exists very far away from me, because space is everywhere, right? So in that sense, Brahman is both near and far away. Brahman is also described as both near and far away from the point of view of knowledge. For a person of knowledge, Brahman is very near because he realizes it as his own self. So it is very near to him. But for a person who is ignorant of the true nature of Brahman, it is very far away because it is distant from him in terms of knowledge. He does not realize its true nature. So in that sense, it is both near and far away. The third way of describing it is inside everything and also outside everything. Now this is another, we can again understand this from the analogy of space. If you take a pot, an empty pot, we can think of space as being within the pot and also outside the pot, because why? Space is all pervasive. Similarly, Brahman, which is all pervasive, is also within everything and outside everything. So these are the contradictory definitions given in the Isha Upanishad to describe Brahman. The next topic is the knowledge of Brahman, and or the definition or the characteristics of Brahman. Now, the 8th shloka of the Isha Upanishad gives a list of attributes which define Brahman. In one shloka, it lists all these attributes. What are they? Brahman is all pervasive, as we saw that. It's all pervasive like space. it is pure, it is bodiless. Now, this bodiless term is used in order to discount the Sukshma Sharira. You must be knowing that the human personality is divided into three bodies or three Shariras. First is the Sthula Sharira, which is the gross body. Second is the Sukshma Sharira, which is the body of energy and the body of mind, the mental body. And the third is the Karana Sharira, which is described as the body of bliss or the causal body, which is what we experience during deep sleep, the absence of everything. Now that is called the Karana Sharira. Leave out Karana Sharira for now. The bodiless that they've mentioned here refers to is given to exclude Sukshma Sharira. Brahman is not the Sukshma Sharira. And the next attribute they mentioned is it is without wounds and sinews. Sinew means, I think, muscles. Without wounds and sinews is given to exclude the Sthula Sharira. It is not the gross body also. The next attribute is it is taintless. It is untouched by sin. It is omniscient. It is the ruler of the mind. It is transcendent and it is self-existent. Swayambhu. So these are the attributes listed in the 8th shloka to define Brahman. The next and the last topic of Ishopanishad that we'll be seeing is Atma Bhava. Atma Bhava, I think, refers to how does a man who has realized his the nature of his self, how does he react? How does he view the universe? The nature of the man who has realized Brahman or reality is also mentioned in the Upanishad as follows. He sees the self in all beings and all beings in the self. Now, this is a theme this is an idea which we'll be finding repeated in the Upanishads, that a man who has realized the self realizes the self as not just something which is within, but also something which is everywhere, as the substratum of everything. He sees the self in all beings and all beings in the self. This idea we also find in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna talks about how a learned man sees everything as equal. The famous shloka, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavi Hastini Shuni Chaiva Shvapakecha Panditaha Samadarshinaha. A Pandita is one who, firstly, he has humility because of Vidya Vinaya Sampanne. He has knowledge and humility because of that knowledge, and this knowledge enables him to see everything as equal. Whether it is a Brahmana, a learned Brahmana, or a horse, or a cow, or a dog, or even people who might be considered to be belonging to the lower castes. Shvapaka refers to them. Shuni Chaiva Shvapakecha Panditaha Samadarshinaha. He sees everything as equal. He has Samadarshina for everything. So this is the same idea which is given here. He sees the self in all beings and all beings in the self, and therefore he does not hate anything or anyone. He does not have a specific preference for some certain things and a specific hatred for certain things. He sees everything as equal. He is equanimous in his dealings with the universe. This realization of oneness takes the man across illusion and sorrow. Moha and Shoka. These are the two terms that are used. He goes beyond Moha and Shoka. Now, Atma Bhava, what it's to be understood is Atma Bhava is the realization of oneness, where a man sees everything as the self and the self as everything. So with that, we finish the topics under Ishopanishad. Thank you.